If you're a lawyer who uses AI tools like Claude Cowork or ChatGPT, you might have heard about tokens, but not really understood what they meant. Tokens are a fundamental concept in artificial intelligence. Understanding how tokens work is going to allow you to get better accuracy out of your large language model of choice. And it's also going to help you reduce costs and make things just go faster in general. I'm going to explain all this in detail. I'm going to be using Claude Cowork as a demonstration, and we're going to be looking at a discovery demands document in particular. Let's first take a look at the claude.com/pricing page, and this has the consumer tier Claude plans available for us to see. We've got the free plan, the pro plan, which is actually $20 a month if you're doing monthly, and then the $100 or the $200 a month max plan. And outside of a bunch of different features, one of the most important differences in pro and max versus free is you get more usage. So pro just gives you more usage, and then max, depending on if you're paying $100 or $200 a month, is going to give you 5 times or even 20 times more usage than the pro plan. But what even is usage in the context of AI? Well, when you're using an AI tool, AI tool you're using is going to respond with a bunch of text on the left-hand side. And sometimes, like in this instance, it just over the course of a month, Anthropic or OpenAI or whoever is going to cut you off, and they're going to say, you hit your usage limit. You are both sending to the LM and how much text it's actually responding with. One way you might think about doing this is just counting the number of words. So if we go here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 words. Then we have 5, 6, looks like 7. Not exactly sure what to do with this comma. We've got an 8th word here, a 9th word. That's one way to think about doing it. But then the issue with looking at words is, well, the word Tommy is longer than the word hey. And you could imagine a lot of really long words are probably going to require more usage than a bunch of short words. And so it doesn't really make sense to compare words because it's not apples to apples. Maybe a better way would be actually characters. So hi consists of H and then I, and then we have a space here. So this HI space is going to be 3 characters. And then once we get to how, that's going to be 4, 5, 6 characters. That's going to be a little bit more accurate in terms of usage because each character is identical in terms of what it's contributing to the overall usage. So you can imagine that Anthropic and OpenAI, they have a hard limit on the number of characters you're allowed to use per month. Let's say it's 1 million on the pro plan. If that made sense to you, you pretty much already understand how tokens work, realize what tokens are. And we're going to paste in the text from our chat. So at the top, I've got, hi, how are you? And then at the bottom, I've got, hey, Tommy, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. What can I help you with today? Which is actually what the LM responded with. Now we can see here that, and note that the number of tokens is always going to be less than the number of characters. Now in this visualization, we can see that OpenAI has actually color-coded the tokens. So this token here, HI, is the first one, space HOW is the second token, space ARE is the third token, space YOU is the fourth token, and you get the idea. And if we were to count up the number of different colors here, we would actually get to 24. The reason that we have tokens and not characters is that LLM, but technical, you don't really need to understand the details of this, but just note that when you send this text to a large language model, it actually receives this mess of numbers under the hood. And if you were to count the number of numbered HI with no spaces on either side, the LM just sees the number 3686. And when we see space HOW, the large language model is going to see 1495. And when the LM responds, it's not really going to output text. It's going to output a bunch of these numbers, and then we have a way to convert those back to the actual text that you and I would like to see. But as a user of Cowork or ChatGPT, all you need to understand is that more text equals more tokens. But what if you're not working with something that's plain text? What if you're working with something like a Word doc? This DOCX file here. And if we take a look at it, it's not very long. It's only about 2 pages. Okay, 3 pages. And if you ever use Claude Cowork or ChatGPT, you know that it can read DOCX files. So the question might be, how many tokens are in a DOCX file? And then dump it into the tokenizer. And we see here we've got about 614 tokens. And another thing to note about tokens is that every word is not necessarily one token. A single word can get broken up into multiple tokens. If we take a look here, portfolio, we have space port, and then F is its own token, and then OL is its own token, and then IO is its own token. And so a token is not exactly a full word. I think in general, one word is going to equal 1.25 or so tokens. But yeah, we have 614 tokens and 2738 characters. But this is not actually right because a DOCX file is so much more than just the text. In fact, a DOCX file is actually a zip file of a bunch of other documents. If we look here, we're poking around at the guts of a DocX file, and you don't really ever need to do this, but Claude, if it wants to read or write a DocX file, has to do exactly this. And what it has to do is take this DocX file, turn it into this folder, and then it has to open this document.xml. And again, the point of going over this is not to what we saw in Microsoft Word. Now, as we scroll down, we are going to see different pieces of the DocX file. So here we see Supreme Court of the State of New York, County of Erie. And if we scroll back to Word, we're going to see here, oh, Supreme Court of the State of New York, County of Erie. And then if we keep going down, and then we go even further, we're going to see defendant Sophia Patel demands that plaintiff, blah, blah, blah. That's going to correspond to here, defendant Sophia Patel demands, blah, blah, blah. So the file itself has far more to its file. It really has to do with this mess. And if we Command A this whole thing, tokens, then just using Command A and copying the text in. Okay, but why does it matter if this is so token inefficient? Why does it matter that this is using 10 times as many tokens? Every message you send in a chat that is interacting with a DocX file is going to use up more tokens and therefore get you closer to hitting your limits. It's also going to be a bit slower. But probably the most important reason has to any AI model you use is going to have what's called a context window limit. Sometimes it's 1 million, sometimes it's a few 100,000. We'll just call it 1 million for the sake of argument. But basically, if you were to have a chat with a model that has a 1 million token context window limit, and you were to paste a bunch of stuff in there, and eventually the amount of tokens reached 1 million, the model would literally fall over. It wouldn't even be able to respond. It would basically just crash. Okay, you might be thinking, well, not really, because there's a more important and more subtle limit that's far under 1 million. And this is what I call the soft limit. In practice, I start to see the soft is where the model starts to get a lot dumber, a lot faster. Models just simply is that the longer your chats get, the more you have to remind Claude or ChatGPT what it's working on, and the more it just forgets stuff and starts to hallucinate things. Consider when you're thinking about tokens and overall context usage. The reason you don't want to be token inefficient is not necessarily because of cost, although that's a big motivator. It's far more because of accuracy. This is why it's generally good advice to start new chats a lot more often than you think you need to and keep each chat scoped to a particular task. So back to the discovery demand document. If you wanted Claude to read this and not necessarily modify the document, but you just wanted Claude to understand what was in the discovery demands, you're much better off converting it to a different file format because Word has a lot of tokens, the amount of information needed in the file to make it format properly in Microsoft Word. If you just want Claude to understand what the demands actually were, it does not need to have the formatting information, Markdown, which is going to end in a .md suffix, HTML, which is going to end in a .html suffix, or just TXT. You might have opened a TXT file before. It'll pop up in text edit if you're using a Mac. And if we take a look here, it is the exact same discovery demands that we saw in Word. It's just going to look a lot more bare bones. The caption is a little bit uglier, of course. You wouldn't submit this to a court, but it's got all the information there. It's got the index number. It's got the first paragraph. And again, just to illustrate, it's got defendant Sophia Patel demands. And then if we scoot over to Word, we're going to see defendant Sophia Patel demands. Information about the formatting. Another good format is Markdown. Here, it's going to look pretty much the same as the TXT file in my browser, but Markdown does support stuff like bold. The final one is going to be HTML. This is the format that a web browser uses to actually read files. If we look here, we're going to notice that it's styled a lot better, so it looks far more like a real pleading. Of course, you wouldn't submit this to a New York court. It's still not conforming with the rules, and it looks a little funky, but it is a lot easier on the eyes if you want to read it. Now, what I'm going to have Claude do is actually tokenize each of these files. So that's going to be the DOCX, the Markdown, the HTML, and the TXT, and then have it tell us how many tokens each one actually uses under the hood. So I'm back in Cowork, and make sure that I'm selecting the folder that has all this stuff in it before I tell it to do anything. And in my case, that is the ABC Law PLLC folder on my desktop. We figure out how many tokens everything is using here. I ran the script, and we take a look at this table here. The DOCX file used about 6518 tokens. The HTML used 2149, which is still a lot, but a third of the DOCX more or less. And then the Markdown and plain text were almost identical with 826 and 809. And again, taking a look at the right-hand side, just looking at the characters is a pretty good rough estimate of how many tokens you're going to use here. And if we take a look, the characters and something, you don't necessarily need to know the number of tokens because you'll understand more characters equals more tokens. More text, more tokens. by far the most efficient because you don't really need all of that formatting information for Microsoft Word. Looking back again at Claude's consumer pricing page, the way that this works, like we said earlier, is that you pay a monthly fee up front and then they give you an allotment of usage. If you were to embed Claude in, you're going to pay, and those are correlated linearly. So if you add an extra gallon of gas, you're going to pay exactly for that. Well, Claude and OpenAI and pretty much any LLM is going to have that kind of pricing as well. And this is what's going to be used if you're using it in your own application. So we look here, this is the Claude API pricing page. And it is a lot more confusing. And you don't need to know what everything means here, but you're going to notice here that for Claude Fable 5, they're going to bill you $10 for every million input tokens. And then $50 side, that's going to be counted as an input token. And then anything that Claude responds with is going to be billed at an output token. It's a lot more work on Anthropic's end and OpenAI's as well to have the model output tokens than it is for the model to just read things. And when I say that, as the chats get longer, you start to use tokens more quickly. Well, when I send this message here, can you figure out how many tokens everything is using here? I have a script. This is actually going to send the entire chat back to Claude. So when I send this message, Claude has to reread all of this stuff, and then it starts outputting as well. So as the chat gets longer, the input tokens gets longer, and that causes you to waste more money. And this matters especially in the context of legal, because legal AI products like Ligora and Harvey are starting to move to what they're calling consumption-based pricing. And you're not going to find the word token anywhere in this article, but basically what Ligora has to do, it's $1,000 a seat, and then under the hood, however many tokens they were using, they had to pay at the gas pump model. So in effect, in order to actually have a profitable business, they now need to take those token costs and put them onto the user. I hope this cleared some things up. The main takeaways would be, are going to be, and most importantly, the dumber the model is going to be, the more hallucinations it's going to make. At a certain point, what I call the soft context limit, the model intelligence starts to drop very, very quickly. You want to be starting new sessions as much as you possibly can and keep every chat focused on a single. Let me know in the comments if you guys have any questions. I'd be happy to go into more detail if you want to shoot me an email, which I'll also include in the description.